The day Mara Doyle tried to sell her last skiff, the cruelest thing on Blackwater Wharf was not the rain. It was the man smiling every time someone offered her less. And by noon, the only buyer who paid her full price had already taken the boat, pressed the wet rope back into her little boy's hands, and vanished into the crowd. That was the moment everyone on the wharf understood something was wrong. Widows did not get fair prices in Blackwater Cove. Not from fish dealers, not from note holders, and certainly not from strangers. The storm had started before dawn, a cold Atlantic rain that turned the planks black and glossy and made every coil of rope smell like salt and rot. Mara stood beside the Mercy, a narrow herring skiff with peeling blue paint, patched seams, and one brass cleat polished bright by years of use. She had scrubbed the boat in the dark anyway, not because she believed kindness lived on that dock, but because dignity was the last thing a poor woman could still choose for herself. Her son Finn stood against her side under a canvas cape that had once belonged to his father. He was 8, old enough to hear the change in adult voices, old enough to know that when his mother went quiet, danger was close. One small hand stayed wrapped in her skirt. The other held a scrap of red cord he had tied to the skiff's stern handle for luck. The Mercy was the last thing they owned that still worked. Her nets were gone. Her spare oars were gone. The better stove had gone in January. The silver brooch her mother left her had gone in March. The skiff was all that remained between them and the kind of poverty people politely called temporary, right before it swallowed a family whole. At the far end of the wharf, beneath the overhang of the chandlery, Gideon Vale watched her with dry gloves and a dry smile. He owned the cannery, the supply books, and half the town's bad seasons. Men said he had built Blackwater Cove into something modern. Men also said a lot of things when they owed him money. When he crossed toward her, people stepped aside without meaning to. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, "I trust this sail will spare us an unpleasant evening." Mara kept her eyes on the skiff. "The note says sunset." "It does." Vale's smile widened. "And if by sunset I am not paid in full, your cottage, your slip, and the shed beside them revert to me by law. I would hate for the boy to watch the lock changed before supper." Finn pressed harder into her side. Mara could feel her pulse in her jaw. "Then I suppose we both know why I'm here." Vale looked over the Mercy the way a butcher looks over an animal already hanging. "A pity. Your husband kept her neat." There was no pity in it. There was ownership, anticipation, pleasure. Step back into the rain, content to watch the day do his work for him. The first man offered $15 and a sack of spoiled salt cod. The second tapped the gunwale with one knuckle, squinted at a patch near the bow, and announced to anyone listening that the boat would leak before first tide. He offered 18. A third man, red-nosed and cheerful in the way cruel men often are when they smell desperation, laughed in Mara's face. 35 for this old gull trap? Widow, the weather has softened your head." A few dockhands laughed with him. Not because the joke was good, but because laughter is cheap when it belongs to somebody else's ruin. Mara did not lower the price. She knew exactly what the Mercy was worth. She knew how she tracked in cross-current. She knew what had been replaced, what had been sealed, how many hard winters the keel had already survived. But the value of a thing changes when a crowd smells fear on the seller. Finn watched every offer arrive and die. With each one, his face changed a little. Hope first, then confusion, then the terrible effort of a child trying not to ask a question he already knows the answer to. By late morning, the rain had thinned to a mist. Bells clanged farther up the harbor. Gulls screamed overhead. Men moved crates of herring past them without ever once looking directly at the woman selling the last piece of her life. That was when Mara noticed the quiet man. He had been there longer than the others, leaning beside a stack of tar barrels near the ice shed. No shouting, no smirking, no circling the boat like a scavenger. He was broad-shouldered, weather-cut, somewhere near 40, in a dark pea-coat gone pale at the seams. His beard was trimmed with a knife instead of vanity. His hands were the kind that had lifted nets, hauled lines, and buried people when the sea would not return them whole. He waited until the louder men drifted off. Then he stepped forward and stopped just short of the skiff, leaving Mara the space every other man had tried to invade. "What's her name?" he asked. The question startled her more than the voice. No one else had asked. "The Mercy." His gaze moved over the skiff slowly, respectfully. He touched 2 fingers to the rail, then glanced toward the patched bow, the spare line under the middle seat, the net hooks wrapped in cloth so they would not split the wood. He was not looking for a bargain. He was reading the boat. Finally, he looked at Mara. "How much do you need?" Not what will you take. Not what is she worth to me. How much do you need? 35, she said. It was enough to clear the note and leave maybe $1 or 2 for lamp oil, flour, and the next decision she did not yet know how to make. The man nodded once, as if the number had only confirmed what he already suspected. Then he reached inside his coat, brought out a weather-dark pouch, and counted silver into his palm. He did not haggle, he did not sigh, he did not perform generosity for the crowd. He just counted the full amount. Even the gulls seemed louder in the silence that followed. Mara stared at the coins in his hand. "You didn't hear me wrong." "I heard you." "Then you know it's more than the others would pay." The others, he said, were not naming a fair price. He placed the money in her hand. It was heavier than she expected, heavy enough to feel like rescue, heavy enough to feel dangerous. Finn looked up at her, then at the stranger, then at the silver, as if trying to understand how all 3 could exist in the same world. The man untied the Mercy's painter rope from the iron ring on the piling and started leading the skiff down the slick edge of the dock. Mara's throat tightened. It was done. The last thing her husband had left them was moving away through the fog. Finn made one small, broken sound and buried his face against her sleeve. Then the stranger stopped. He turned back, walked through the mist, and crouched in front of Finn until they were eye level. "Here," he said, holding out the rope. "You keep her steady for me, lad. I'll come back." Finn looked at Mara. Mara looked at the stranger. Neither of them understood. But Finn took the rope. The man rose, gave Mara the briefest nod, and disappeared into the wet crowd before she could find words large enough to stop him. For a few seconds, Mara could only stand there, gripping the silver so hard it bit crescents into her palm. The money should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like a trap she had not yet seen. Finn still held the rope. The Mercy still floated beside the dock, and the one man who had changed everything had walked away as if he expected the world to wait for him. It did not. Gideon Vale returned almost at once, as if he had been hiding just out of sight for this exact moment. "Well," he said softly, "Providence appears to favor you after all." His eyes dropped to Mara's closed fist. "I'll take the payment now." Mara's spine went cold. "At your office, before sunset." Vale extended a gloved hand. "Now is cleaner." The note says sunset," he interrupted, "not location. You have my money. I am present. Why complicate what can be done here?" People passed around them carrying crates, hooks, barrels, lines. No one stopped. Public cruelty works best when it keeps its voice low. Mara stepped back, and Finn stepped with her, still holding the painter rope, still too young to understand the law, and old enough to recognize hunger when it smiled. Vale took one step closer. "Unless," he said, "you meant to avoid your creditor. That would be foolish. The constable is rarely patient with women who mistake delay for cleverness." There it was. Not debt. Control. He wanted the money on the dock because he wanted the humiliation in the open. He wanted her to hand over every last coin while still standing beside the boat she had just lost. Mara's mouth went dry. If she gave him the silver now, she might save the cottage for a day and still lose the skiff forever. If she refused, he could make a spectacle of her before half the harbor. Finn looked up at her with rain on his lashes and fear in his eyes. The Mercy bumped softly against the dock. Once, twice. Then another voice cut through the mist. "I think she already told you where payment will be made." The stranger was back. He seemed to appear out of the harbor fog rather than walk through it. He stepped between Mara and Vale with no haste at all, which somehow made it worse. Men in a hurry can be rattled. Men who arrive calm already know where the ground is solid. Vale gave him a thin look of annoyance. "This concerns no one but me and Mrs. Doyle." "It concerns me," the man said, "when I see a note holder reaching for what isn't settled yet." Vale sniffed. "And who are you?" The stranger held his gaze long enough for something to shift. Then he said, "A man whose father signed papers with you the year before he died." Vale's expression changed by degrees. First, impatience, then uncertainty, then the first flicker of memory. The stranger went on. You told a grieving family a title survey had changed. You told them the lower slip was worthless. You bought the parcel cheap before the new shipping road was announced. And you filed the transfer with a witness who had been dead 2 weeks. The color drained from Vale's face. Mara turned, stunned, from one man to the other. The stranger's voice stayed level. My name is Elias Reed. Vale's lips parted. The name hit him like cold water. Blackwater Cove knew the Reeds, or had once, before Elias's father drowned outside the headland and the family land passed into quieter hands. Vale took a step back. You left. I did, Elias said. And while I was gone, you built a fortune on what never belonged to you. He pointed past the wharf, past the rain-dark sheds, toward the narrow row of workers' cottages near the inlet. The slip, the shed, and the cottage you're threatening to take from her stand on Reed property. My father's property. I have registry copies in my coat and a lawyer in St. John waiting for the rest. The harbor noise seemed to fall away. Mara felt the day tilt beneath her feet. This was no longer a widow selling a boat, no longer a creditor collecting a debt. Something older had surfaced, something buried. Vale recovered just enough to sneer. A claim is not a judgment. No, Elias said, but it is enough to crack your title wide open. Vale looked from Elias to Mara and understood all at once that the easy ending he had been enjoying since dawn was gone. He muttered something about insolence, about courts, about trespass and slander. None of it landed. The force had gone out of him. Men like Gideon Vale are tallest when no one names what they are. He backed away one careful step at a time, then turned and disappeared into the movement of the harbor with all the dignity of a man retreating from a fire he cannot smother. Mara was left standing in the mist with her son, her boat, her silver, and a stranger who had just split her world open. Elias turned toward her. For the first time since returning, some of the iron left his face. I came back for him, he said quietly, glancing in the direction Vale had gone. That was all. He took a folded packet from inside his coat and held it where she could see the seal and ribbon, though not yet the writing. I have copies from the county books, affidavits, enough to drag him into court and make him bleed for every lie. Mara swallowed. Then why buy my skiff? Elias looked at Finn, whose hands were still wrapped around the wet rope. Because I watched him prepare to take the last thing your boy still believed was yours, he said. And I couldn't watch another child learn that lesson while I stood there doing nothing. Not charity, not pity, recognition. Elias continued, If I fight Vale alone, I think I win. But court is slow, and men like him know how to make slow feel like starvation. He'd tie the property up for months, maybe longer. He'd choke your work freeze your credit, and have you put out before any judge signed a final page. Mara knew he was telling the truth because it was exactly what she would do if she were born with a crueler soul. Rainwater slid from the edge of Elias's cap. "There is one way to make it harder for him," he said. Mara already hated how steady her heart became when he spoke. Steady meant he was about to say something real. He took a breath. "Marry me." Finn's head jerked up. Mara stared at him. Elias did not look away. "Not for romance," he said. "Not for church bells or soft talk. For law, for shelter, for leverage. If our names stand together, Vale can't peel you off that property without opening the deed I came back to break. He loses the clean story. He loses the easy widow. And your boy stops standing alone in the doorway every time a man with papers comes calling." The harbor kept moving around them. Boots, gulls, chains, bells, wind. But inside Mara, everything had gone strange and still. Marriage. To a man she had not known that morning. A man who had bought her skiff, given it back, shamed the most feared lender in town, and now stood in the rain offering not a future anyone would call tender, but one she might call survivable. Elias's voice dropped. "I am not asking for faith without terms. You would keep your son. You would keep your boat. You would keep a say in every decision that touches your life. And when Vale comes again, he will not find you by yourself." There was no performance in him, no romance borrowed from songs, just a hard offer honestly made. That was what made it dangerous. Mara looked at Finn. He was no longer crying. He was watching Elias with that fierce, silent concentration children reserve for moments that will shape the rest of their lives without asking permission first. Then she looked at the Mercy. Rain ran in thin lines along the faded blue rail. Finn's red cord still fluttered at the stern. Her husband's hand had planed that middle seat. Her own hands had tarred the seams. She had come to the wharf believing she was here to surrender the last proof that her family had ever stood on its own. But the day had turned on a hidden hinge. The boat had not left. The creditor had lost his footing. And the stranger standing in front of her was not asking her to be rescued. He was asking whether she was willing to stop being cornered alone. Mara thought of winter coming in off the Atlantic, of empty cupboards, of Finn asleep while she counted unpaid things in the dark, of Gideon Vale's smile, of all the slow humiliations that make up a poor life when no one interrupts them. Then she thought of one more thing. Elias had not taken the rope from her child. In Blackwater Cove, that alone meant more than most vows. She let out a breath that felt years old. Then she gave one slow nod. Not dramatic, not trembling, just final. Something in Elias's shoulders eased, as if he had been bracing for a wave that did not hit. The clouds were breaking out beyond the harbor mouth. A band of late light spread across the water, turning the black planks bronze and catching in the silver still resting in Mara's palm. She opened her hand, looked at the money, then picked out one coin. She pressed it into Finn's fingers. "Go on," she said. Finn looked up. "For what?" Mara's voice was steadier than it had been all day. "Pay the man for our skiff." Finn's eyes widened. Then a smile, small and disbelieving and bright as struck metal, broke across his face. He stepped toward Elias and held up the coin with both hands. Elias looked at the boy, then at Mara, then closed his fingers around the silver as if accepting something sacred instead of small. He gave the coin a glance and placed it in his pocket. Then he folded Finn's hand back over the wet rope. "She was never mine," he said softly. The Mercy knocked once against the wharf, as if answering for herself. And there, in the salt mist and the smell of herring and tar, the shape of 3 ruined lives shifted into something else. Not a miracle, not a love story finished in an afternoon, not even safety, not yet. A widow who was no longer bargaining alone. A boy who did not have to watch everything be carried away. And a man who had come back for justice, only to find that justice sometimes arrived looking like a family built in bad weather. Behind them, Blackwater Cove kept working. Ahead of them, Vale was still dangerous. The courts were still slow. Winter was still coming. But when Mara turned toward home, Finn beside her, and Elias carrying the skiff line over one shoulder, the horizon no longer looked empty. It looked contested. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.